first thing is that we should just see a small piece of Gemara in Megillah to talk about that indicates to us that there's an evolution in the institution of Purim. What do we mean by that? So the Gemara says on Daf Hey at the very beginning, at the very bottom of Amud Aleph on Daf Hey, Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Rebbe Natan Atiyah b'Purim, that Rebbe planted a plant on Purim, which is the performance of a malacha, if this were Shabbos or Yom Tov. So that doesn't seem to be a problem for you and me because we drive on Purim. But let's see the Gemara's question. And there's a lot of other information here. We're just skipping to the relevant information. V'Rebbe heichi natan atiyah b'Purim. How could Rebbe do such a thing? V'hatani Rav Yoseph simcha u'mishta v'yom tov. The pasuk, after all, says that Purim was instituted as a day of simcha, mishta, feasting, and yom tov. And so, simcha, melamed shasurim behesped. What does the word simcha teach? This teaches me that we're not allowed to have eulogies on Purim. Mishta, melamed shasur b'tanis, teaches me that you're not allowed to fast on Purim. And yom tov, melamed shasur b'asiyas malacha. This teaches that you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to do any malacha on Purim, which would include planting or any of the 39 malachas. So Rabbi Berei Derava Amar, again, there's a lot of information that we're skipping, but Rabbi Berei Derava says, Afilu tema biyome. The Gemara had tried to argue maybe he wasn't planting on Purim, maybe he was on Shushan Purim, but the Gemara says no. According to Rabba, really he planted on Purim itself. Hesped v'tanes kabilu alayhu, Melacha lo kabilu alayu. Because originally, when Mordechai and Esther wished to institute the celebration of Purim, they had told people it's a simcha, mishta, and yom tov. But they only accepted upon themselves not to have eulogies and not to fast. But they did not accept upon themselves to forbid themselves from melacha. Demikar ksiv simcha mishta v'yom tov. Because when you look at scripture in the Megillah, you find that initially the word Yom Tov is mentioned, and then at a later pasuk, Yom Tov disappears. So we find that initially the effort was to make Purim a day that you had to treat like a Yom Tov, like Shavuos or Sukkos, but that was later rescinded, and it only became a day of feasting and no eulogies, but not a day of desisting from malacha. And that was Rebbe's justification for planting on Purim. Okay, so far so good. Now, what psukim is the Gemara referring to? It's psukim in Perek Tes in the Megillah, because in pasuk Yud Tes it says, Al kein ha-Yehudim ha-Pirazim ha-Yoshavim be'arei ha-Pirazos. And therefore it says that Jews who live in unwalled cities, Osim eis yom arba'asar l'chodesh adar simcha u'mishta v'yom tov. They make it as a day of simcha, mishta, and yom tov, those three terms that the Gemara had referenced. U'mishloach manos ish l're'ehu, and gift parcels to each one to his fellow. Now later on, if you look just a couple of psukim later on pasuk Chaf Beis, that's where the Gemara says that the words yom tov are missing. It says, Kayomim asher nachu vahem hayudim me'oyevehem, that they would continue to have this as a perpetual holiday on the same days when the Jews had respite from their enemies. Ve'achodesh asher nehapach lahem miyagon l'simcha u'me'eva liyom tov, and in the same month that this day had turned from a day of dread it turned from dread to joy, from mourning to yom tov. La'asososam, to make these days into Yemei Mishta v'Simcha, days of Mishta and Simcha, but not to make them into days of Yom Tov. And that's what the Gemara is referring to. And then the pasuk concludes with Mishloach Manos ish l're'ehu u'matanos le'evyonim. Gift parcels one man to his fellow, and gifts for the poor. So the Gemara observes quite correctly that in the second time that the day of Purim is demarcated as a day of celebration, as far as what the Jews would make it into for future generations, Yom Tov is omitted. It's true that the words Yom Tov do appear in Pasuk Chaf Beis, but that refers to the initial fact that historically Purim, which was supposed to be a day of mourning, turned into a day of Yom Tov, where they presumably didn't work on that day other than to fight their enemies and to celebrate. But in future generations, they made them into days of Mishta v'Simcha, but not Yom Tov, not a day where you can't work. Now, I also want to observe, besides the Gemara's diuk, that Yom Tov is missing from Pasuk Chaf Beis, another quite curious observation, which is that what else do you see as a difference between Pasuk Yud Tes and Pasuk Chaf Beis? Can anyone see? Matanos Levyonim is missing from Pasuk Yud Tes, and it's only mentioned in Pasuk Chaf Beis. In Pasuk Yud Tes, it says, Umishloach Manos ish l're'ehu, gift parcels man to his fellow. In Pasuk Chaf Beis, when it talks about what the Jews accepted upon themselves, it says, Umishloach Manos ish l're'ehu umatanos le'evyonim. That's a very unusual thing. So does that mean that initially Mordechai did not want them to give tzedakah to the poor? That seems to be a little bit far-fetched or contrived, perhaps. So let's see if we can come up with a different answer. And in the course of this discussion, and trying just to look into this a little bit, I discovered something that I don't think I ever knew before. And that is that Mishloach Manos is a universal concept that is a representation of what a person is supposed to do on every Yom Tov. In other words, when we first look at the mitzvahs of Purim, we understand Su'udas Purim is not unique to Purim. It is one of the mitzvahs of Purim. Matanos Le'evyonim seems to be unique to Purim, and Mishloach Manos seems to be unique to Purim. But that's actually not true. Both Mishloach Manos and Matanos Le'evyonim is not unique to Purim. But that's actually a precursor to Pesach, not on Pesach, the day itself. Mm-hmm. But what I'd like to show you is the fact that originally, on every Yom Tov, there was a tradition of sending Mishloach Manos ish l're'ehu u'matanos le'evyonim. On every single Yom Tov, that was considered the accepted practice. Part and parcel of celebrating Yom Tov was not only to have food for yourself, but to also to share food items with your fellow. And that will become relevant in our understanding of these psukim that we just quoted, and why the Jewish people did not accept a Yom Tov as far as prohibiting themselves from working. So take a look at the Gemara. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Beitza. It's in the Talmud Bavli. It's on Daf Yud Daled Amud Beis, and it's in source number 3.
The other sources are also with the same specifications and all the details that we have with the one associated with Purim?
Well, you'll see. You'll see in just a second. I'm going to get to that. Mishnah says, first of all, you see that there is some specification right here in the Mishnah when it comes to mitzvah of Mishloach Manos. The Mishnah says, Beishamai Omrim, Ein Mishalchin B'Yom Tov Ela Manos. That Beishamai say that when you want to send gifts to your friend, you can only send manot. Now, isn't that curious that it's the exact same word, Mishloach Manos? You can only send manos according to Beishamai. Now, what are manos? So Rashi in source number 4 says, Ein mishalchin doron ish l're'ehu. You may not send a gift of one man to his fellow, ela manos, davar hamuchan, something that is ready to use. Ve'eno asui lahanicho l'machar, not something that you would have to leave over tomorrow. Kegon chatichot basar chatuchot lifnei ha'orchin v'chein dagim. What's an example of something that's ready to use? Pieces of meat that are already cut into portion size for guests, and the same thing with fish. Meaning that you shouldn't send a friend a whole tuna, right? Because he'd have to gut it, and it would take time to prepare. But if you send him tuna fillets, then that's fine, because that he can use on Yom Tov itself. That's according to Beis Shammai. Comes along Beis Hillel and says, Ubeis Hillel Omrim, Mishalchin behema chaye va'of, bein chayin bein shchutin. That no, you can send any kind of usable item, whether, even if the animal is not yet shechted, you're allowed to send. Now, what is Beis Hillel's basis for saying this? Because you can always shecht the animal on Yom Tov. If I send you a lamb as a gift on Yontif, you can shech the lamb. So all I'm doing is I'm just requiring you to do a little bit more preparation. I can send you a whole fish and you'll gut it. Fine, I'll take a little bit more preparation. So, and then the Mishnah says, Mishalchin yenos shmonim slatos v'kitnios avolot tvua. And even according to Beis Hillel, you can send wine and oil, flour, legumes, beans, but you cannot send wheat or grain. And Reb Shimon matir batvua. And Reb Shimon says even grain you can send. What's the machlokas as far as grain is concerned? Because there, like Rashi explains, avolot loas atvua, you're not allowed to send grain. She'ena ru'uya ha'yom, she'en tochenin b'yom tov, she'hay lo litchon me'esmol, v'lo tafid tama. He says, because by sending grain, you're going to, that's not something that you can use readily on Yontif, because you'd have to grind it. And grinding is not one of the permissible things that we allow you to do on Yontif. There are malachos that you can do for ochel nefesh on Yontif, but only from lisha and onwards, only from adding water to flour and onwards. But we don't allow you to grind grain into flour on Yontif. So if I send you grain, I'm not sending you something, even according to Beis Hillel, I'm not sending you something that you can use.
On that basis, how does Reb Shimon matir?
Why does Reb Shimon matir? Good. So what does Rashi say? Shema yevashlim b'kedeir v'yichteshem b'machteshes ketana. Because you can make cereal out of it. Even if you don't grind it into flour, you could make a farina or some other kind of hot cereal, even from whole grain. And that's why Reb Shimon says it's okay. Okay, but Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai disagree, and they say you can't do that because since the normative use of grain is for milling it into flour, and you can't mill on Yontif, it's not permitted.
Only on Shabbos that you can't give a gift.
Who says on Shabbos you can't give a gift if it's food that's ready to eat for Shabbos?
Like the Sfarim for the Bar Mitzvah boys, right? For example.
That's something different. For food, though, we're generally makel. For food that you can make a kinyan. This is something that the poskim discuss as far as what kinyanim you can and cannot make on Shabbos and Yontif. But you see very clearly over here that that when it comes to food, and certainly on Yontif, this is perfectly fine. There's a lot more to discuss on using an eruv, not using an eruv, whether it's on Shabbos and stuff like that. But we'll stick to Yontif for now. This is codified in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Tav Kuf Tes Zayin says, "Muter lishloach lechaveru b'yom tov behema chayev ha'of afilu chayim." We paskin like Beis Hillel, that you're allowed to send your friend even a living animal as a gift on Yontif. V'yeno shmanu muslatos v'kitnios avalo tvua lefishu mechuseres tchina shimalacha ha'asura b'yom tov. And you can therefore send him manufactured products like wine and oil and flour, but you cannot send him whole grain because that's something that is normally milled into flour, which cannot be done on Yom Tov. So that's codified, that's the way we paskin. Now, from the language of the Shulchan Aruch and the Nosei Kalim, and from the language of even the Mishnah itself, it appears as if there's no halachic mandate that it's part of the obligations of the day. Right? However, if you take a look at some of the Rishonim, like the Shibbolei Haleket, they tell us that really, in keeping with the spirit of Yom Tov, this is something that truly should be considered to be obligatory. Take a look at what he says. He quotes from the Yereim, which is an earlier Rishon, and he says as follows in source number 6. Kosav Bal HaYereim, Lamadnu shekol simcha ha'ru'uya la'adam, v'chol davar ha'mesamcho chayev adam la'asos beregel, v'chol davar shelevavo motzei simcha v'koras ruach. That we are taught that any joy that a person can do that brings him gladness of his heart, he's obligated to do on the Shalosh Regalim. And anything that provides him with joy is supposed to be saved for Yontif, that you can do it then. Now, obviously, if what you're doing involves doing malach on Yontif, that would not be okay. So, if you enjoy online gambling, that's not something that we would tell you to save for Yontif, right? But we don't advocate that anyway. But the point is that obviously it's within the parameters of Yontif. But what are some examples of things that give a person joy? So ba'achila, ushasiya, vitiyul, eating, drinking, and shpatzirim, or nature walks, or even going to a special, vacation spot would be appropriate to save that for Yantiv. Okay, so v'chol davar shesimcha hilo chayav la'asod. Anything that brings you joy, you have to do that on Yantiv. So if you know that there's an activity that gives you joy, do it on Yantiv. U'chashem shechayav lismoach ba'atzmo, kach chayav l'sameach ishto uvanav uvenosav uvenei vesa. And just like you're obligated to have personal joy, you're also obligated to bring joy to the members of your household. Kedichsiv, as it says, v'somachta b'chagecha, ata uvincha uvitecha. As it says, you shall rejoice on your holiday, you and your son and your daughter. Uchashem shechayav l'sameach banav uvnei veso, kach chayav l'sameach es acherim imo. Just like you have an obligation to cause joy to befall your family members, you also have an obligation to give joy to other people. Kirichsiv v'halevi asher bisharecha, v'hager v'hayasom v'ha'almana asher bikirbecha. As it says, you have to give joy to the Levi that is in your gates, the convert, the orphan, and the widow. These are people who are considered to be, from an economic standpoint, an underprivileged class of Jews, and therefore you have to do your utmost to bring them joy as well. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu arba b'nei batim yeshli, and Levi v'ger v'yasam v'almana, v'arba b'nei batim yesh lecha, bincha uvitcha v'amascha v'avdecha. So the way the Shibbolei, or the Sefer Yereim, seems to be quoting Medrash, and it says that Hashem says, look, I have 4 different kinds of members of my household. You have 4 different kinds of members of your household. The 4 members of my household, says God, are the Levi, the Ger, the Yasom, and the Almana. The 4 different members of your household are Bincha, your son, Bitecha, your daughter, Amascha ve'avdecha, your handmaiden and your servant. Im atav misameach es sheli, ani misameach es shelcha. If you give joy to my household members, then I will make sure that your household members have joy as well. V'chein be'ezra hu omer. And similarly in Sefer Ezra it says, and this is really a quote from Sefer Nehemiah, but a lot of times Chazal, when they quote from Sefer Nehemiah, call it Sefer Ezra, because originally it was called Ezra 1 and Ezra 2. And therefore it says, L'chu ichlu mashmanim ushesu mamtakim, v'shilchu manos la'ein nachon lo. That Ezra speaks to the people on Rosh Hashanah itself. Or I don't remember, maybe it was Nehemiah. I don't remember who gathered the people, but the prophet speaks to the people on Rosh Hashanah. The pasuk says that it was the first day of the 7th month, which is Rosh Hashanah. So it's a Yom Tov, and he says, go, eat tasty, delicate foods, drink delicate or exotic beverages, and send manot. Again, the same word as Mishloach Manos, le'ein nachon lo, to someone who does not have his own. So you see, therefore, that Yom Tov is a time of providing for those who don't have. And so already you're starting to see from the Baal Yereim that there's an aspect of both Mishloach Manos and Matanos Levyonim on Yom Tov. That's a feature of Yom Tov. And so it certainly makes sense when we look at the pasuk in the Megillah, and going back to pasuk Yutes, why it says La'asos osam arsav simcha u'mishta v'yom tov u'mishloach manos ish l're'ehu. Why does the words Mishloach Manos ish l're'ehu come right after the words Yom Tov? Because part and parcel of making a day into a Yom Tov is making sure that not only am I happy, but other people are happy as well. We find a similar idea in the Shalah HaKadosh in source number 7.
So,
yeah.
Maybe this is premature, but is this part of the mitzvah? We now understand that this is the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov.
Right. V'samachta b'chagecha.
Right.
Right. It's part of the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. Right.
Right. And how does everybody do it, so on and so forth? This really is capturing the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov.
Correct.
Is that different than the Megillah's requirement of Mishloach Manos there?
It does seem to be, and I will get to that. We'll have to draw some distinctions. It seems like there's a much more rigid definition of this mitzvah when it comes to Purim than when it comes to Yom Tov. There is no siman in Shulchan Aruch to tell us how we're supposed to give Mishloach Manos on Yom Tov. It just says when you do so, you're allowed to give these items, right? But it doesn't say that it's part and parcel of the mitzvahs hayom. And so I want to get to that momentarily. The Shalah HaKadosh also writes a very similar idea in Maseches Sukkah. So if you take a look at source number 7, he writes, "Vani ter machalel ledaber behilchos Yom Tov." So before I finish discussing the laws of Yom Tov, I wanted to tell you this. Hineni maybe od pasuk echad hashayach liyom tov. I want to bring another pasuk that's related to Yom Tov. Amar Shlomo HaMelech Olav HaShalom, B'Yom Tova Hayeh Bid Tov. Shlomo HaMelech said in Koheles, on a good day, you should be Bid Tov. Now, what is that word Bid Tov? He says, Tov lo nemar ela Bid Tov. It says Bid Tov, and the way you read it, the way he reads it is Habez Yisera, Romez Sheyeh Ha'adam Tov B'Yom Tov B'Shnei Minei Tovot. That it's read as Beis Tov. That there should be two goodnesses on the day of Yom Tov. The Zehu B'Tov, Beis Tov, Tov L'Didei B'Machal U'V'Mishta U'Levush, Hu Uveso, that the first Tov that you're supposed to experience on Yom Tov is a personal Tov for yourself and your family, in the sense of food and clothing. V'Tov La'achrini, Ratzalomar Sheyishlach Manos La'einachan Lo U'Barech Hashem Chelo. That means that you should send gift parcels to those who are less fortunate and don't have. And that way, Hashem will enrich your wealth. So you see, he's sort of imaging the same idea as the Sefer Yereim is quoted by the Shibbolei Haleket. And as a matter of fact, the Shla himself actually quotes the Shibbolei Haleket afterwards. And then he quotes from the Tur. He says, V'zel Loshem HaTur Orachaim B'Hilchas Yom Tov, Mitzvahs Yom Tov L'chalko Chetziu L'Beis HaMedrash V'Chetziu L'Achila U'Shasiya. That at first the Shulchan Aruch says you should divide the day between learning and eating and drinking. Va'al yitzamtzeim b'hotzos Yom Tov. You should not be stingy when it comes to expenditures for Yom Tov. B'tzarach lechabdo ula'anago kemo b'Shabbos, and you have to honor it and make it pleasant like you do on Shabbos. And he says, Od kasav harambam chayv adam lio sameach b'tov leiv b'moed. Hu v'ishta uvana v'chol hanilvim elav. And that not only do you have to be joyous on the Yom Tov, but your wife and your children and all your dependents. Keitzad mesamchan, how do you give them joy? Haktanim nosim kloyos ve'egozim. Children, you give nuts and parched grain. And v'hanashim kona lehem begadim v'tachshitim kefi mamono. You know this famous halacha. And women, you're supposed to buy clothing and jewelry according to your means. V'chayiv lahachil lager layasam v'lalmana im shar haniyim. And you have to also give to eat to the convert, the orphan and the widow, as well as other poor people in the community. But if someone locks the doors of his house and he eats and drinks only with his wife and his children, ignoring the underclass of society, and you don't give food to the poor and to the embittered souls, that's not a simcha of a mitzvah, that's the simcha of just self-indulgence. And about such people it says in Hosea that their offerings are really like, a gratuitous form of self-indulgence. Okay, and then he brings the Shibbolei Haleket. But essentially you have him quoting the same idea, that in Yom Tov it's an obligation to provide for those other than your own family members, especially those who are less fortunate than yourself. And therefore, you already see that this idea of Simcha and Yom Tov is inclusive of the idea of both Mishloach Manos and Matonos Levyonim. As a matter of fact, I found on the Bar Ilan CD, there's a sefer called Minhagei HaChagim, and it brings down a whole bunch of different minhagim. It's a modern sefer, sometime from the 20th century, and it talks about the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos be'erev Rosh Hashanah. Ha-Pri Chadash nohag lishloach manos laniyim be'erev Rosh Hashanah. The Pri Chadash used to have a minhag that he would send food parcels to friends on erev Rosh Hashanah so that people could have food on Rosh Hashanah. Hatam al pi hamuva b'Nechemya. He says it's based on the pasuk in Nehemiah that we saw from the Shibbolei Haleket. Ichlu mashmanim ushesu mamtakim v'shilchu manos le'einachon lo. That it's based on this was the edict that the Navi gave to the people, that on Rosh Hashanah share food with your friends. That's part of the simcha, is Mishloach Manos. Now, in the paragraph afterwards, he quotes Harav Gazin, who says, why don't we do it today? Why isn't this more of a widespread practice, what the Pri Chadash used to do? After all, it's based on a pasuk. And he says, because it's a bad siman. He says, on Rosh Hashanah, we're so worried about simanim, as doing things which activate a portent for the coming year. And if you were to publicly announce that we have food for aniyim, you'd be declaring these people aniyim on Erev Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Hashanah. That would be a bad siman for them for the entire year. So on that basis, people desist from doing this minhag of sending food parcels to the widow, the orphan, and the convert, so as not to stigmatize them for the entire year as being an underclass. Okay, that's an interesting explanation, whether or not that should deter a person from sending gifts to his friends and sharing with his friends on Erev Rosh Hashanah. I'm not so sure, but it's a beautiful minhag nonetheless. Now, take a look now at the interesting thing that I saw from the Torah Tamima that helps us better understand the psukim. And remember, one of the things I told you that was disturbing me was why in the first pasuk only Mishloach Manos is mentioned, and in the second pasuk it says Mishloach Manos ish l're'ehu umatanos la'evyonim. So why is that? So the Torah Tamima points this out as well. He says, he first quotes from the Gemara that says that the Jews did not accept upon themselves the Isser Malacha that Mordechai and Esther originally wanted to institute to make it a full-fledged Yom Tov. He says, Val pi zeh yesh lechavein diuk nimratz ma shebepasuk zeh ksivu matanos levyonim ma she'en kein la'el bepasuk yutes Chaser haprat minu matanos levyonim. He says, why is it that in pasuk Yutes it only says Mishloach Manos and it doesn't say Matanos levyonim as it does in pasuk Chav Beis? Achine bepasuk ahu ksiv simcho mishtavi Yom Tov. He says, because in the first pasuk it includes the word Yom Tov. The kaimelam bebeitza tesvavam et beis the mitam Yom Tov tzarach lishloach manos laniyim kidichsiv be'ezu v'shilchu manos la'einachon lo. He says, because on Yom Tov, you're obligated to share food with those less fortunate based on the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, as it says in Sefer Ezra Nehemiah, right? V'lochein lo hayitzarich lefarishu matanas levyonim b'shvil Purim, kevin debalav hachi sholchim b'Yom Tov. He says, and that's the reason why it was unnecessary to flesh it out and say explicitly matanos levyonim, because once you're stating that it's a Yom Tov, and that was the institution, that Purim has the same status as any other biblically mandated Yom Tov, then implicit in that is that there's an obligation of Matanos Levyonim. And that's why it wasn't necessary to write it in Pasuk Yotes, Matanos Levyonim. Ma she'en ken kan delo ksiv Yom Tov mishum delo kabilu alayhu hayitzarech lahosif hapratu Matanos Levyonim bishvil Purim. But now that the Jews did not accept upon themselves to make it into a full-fledged Yom Tov, it was necessary to, in more carefully detail, what the mitzvahs that did remain. It's not a Yom Tov anymore. So if it's not a Yom Tov anymore, so does that mean that I don't have an obligation of Simchas Yom Tov for the poor? No. That's why the pasuk has to say explicitly that yes, you do. I'd like to say slightly different from the Torah Tamima, but based upon his diuk, which I think is the correct diuk. What I'm suggesting is, and I believe that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyehu and Matanos Levyonim really go hand in hand. On Yom Tov, there's both a mitzvah of Mishloach Manos Ish L'Reyehu, like members of your household and your friends, like you saw from the Mishnah in Beitza, but also there's a mitzvah of sharing with those that are less fortunate with yourself. But if the pasuk had said that it's already a Yom Tov, then you don't need to explicate as much the obligations of the day, because once you say U'mishlach manos ish l're'ehu, it's implicit that you mean all the things that apply to a regular Yom Tov. And just like we saw from the Shibbolei Haleket that on Yom Tov not only do you have to share with your friends and family members, but you have to share with the poor, that would be implicit. But now that you take away the Yom Tov aspect of, you say that there's no Isser Malacha anymore, it becomes necessary to more carefully and explicitly detail and accentuate the mitzvahs of Yom Tov that still linger. There's no Isser Malacha, but there are other aspects of Yom Tov that still apply. And this is really to go to answer Lazer's question. When we look at the halachos of Purim, and we look at the mitzvahs of Matanos Levyonim and Mishloach Manos, that Matanos Levyonim, you're obligated to give this amount of money, enough for one meal to two different poor people. And Mishloach Manos, you have to give enough, you have to give two specific kind of foods to one friend. You don't have that level of detail that in other chagim that you do for Purim. But why is that? Many times, asu chachamim chizuk ledivreihem yoser mishel Torah. In other words, this was Mordechai's way of getting back at the Jews who didn't want to accept this from Malacha on Purim. Not in a mean way, not in a malicious way, but he was saying to the Jewish people as follows: okay, fine, Chevra, I understand. It's not practical to impose an Isser Malacha on a rabbinically mandated holiday. But in order to retain the festive Yom Tov aspect of Purim without the Isser Malacha, we have to upgrade the fine-tuning and the detail of the mitzvahs of Yom Tov that still are applicable and extant on Yom Tov. And that is the Mishloach Manos and the Matanos Levyonim. And that's why the Pasuk is more explicit. It's true that if it was a Yom Tov where there was an Isser Malacha, there would also be a mitzvah of Mishloach Manos and Matanos Levyonim, but perhaps not as stringent as the way that they are today, with a separate siman and a sif in Shulchan Aruch for Matanos Levyonim and a separate sif in Shulchan Aruch for Mishloach Manos. But now that there's no Isser Malacha, we have to be mechazik those aspects of Yom Tov that still do apply, and that's why it's more accentuated on Purim than other Yomim Tovim. So I think that in itself is an important idea, and it will also help us answer a basic kasha about the nature of Mishloach Manos on Purim versus the nature of Mishloach Manos on a regular Yom Tov. If you were following carefully, you would note that in this machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, as what kind of food parcels we're supposed to send to our friends, we noted in the Mishnah that Beis Shammai say that you have to send food that's prepared already. It has to be in filet portions, ready to serve or ready to cook portions. And according to Beis Hillel, you can even send a live animal that's ready to shecht. Now, how does the Shulchan Aruch paskin? We saw the Shulchan Aruch paskins like we would expect the Shulchan Aruch to paskin. Anytime there's a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, we paskin like Beis Hillel. And therefore we paskin that when you want to send Mishloach Manos to your friend on Yom Tov, you can send a sheep or a lamb. Is that the halacha on Purim? On Purim, can you send your friend a lamb? Ding dong, and instead of a basket on your doorstep, you get a lamb with a ribbon tied around it and it's wrapped in cellophane, right? Is that going to work? Are you to fulfill the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos?
But it even has to be ready to eat, not even raw.
So, first of all, the answer is no. You don't fulfill the mitzvah by sending an animal. But even beyond that, there's even, according to the Maharil that is quoted by the Magen Avraham, we're even more machmir than Beis Shammai is on Purim. What do I mean by that? Take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. When the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Taf Reish Tzadi Hey Sifkat and Chaf, when he talks about the two food parcels that you have to send to a friend on Purim, so first of all, the Shulchan Aruch requires two different kinds of food, which is not something that we see the poskim discussing on Yom Tov. But beyond that, the Mishnah Berurah says, "V'lo begadim u'sha'arei dvarim." You may not send clothes and other gifts. It has to be specifically food. V'hu adin mashke d'shaper dami d'shasiya b'chlal achila. But then he quotes the Shalah and other achronim who say that you're allowed to send drink. So if you wanted to send a humintashin and a bottle of grape juice, that's perfectly fine as well, because drink is included in foods. That's considered to be manos. Okay, v'chein sagi be'echad ochel ve'echad mashke. And it's also okay if one is a food and one is a beverage. Uba'inan shihi yamin oichel hamevushal v'lo basar chai. But it's necessary for it to already be cooked. It cannot be a raw piece of meat or a raw piece of fish. Why? De Mishloach Manos haroi miyad la'achila mashma. Because it's mashma from the pasuk of Mishloach Manos that it has to be ready to eat. V'yesh omrim dekiven shehu shachot v'roi lihispashel miyad shari. But some say that even if it's raw, as long as you can just pop it in the oven and cook it in 5 minutes or roast it in 5 minutes and it's edible, then you also fulfill the mitzvah. So it's a machlokes achronim between the Magen Avraham who quotes the Maharil, and I think this is the Pri Chadash who says that you can even send a raw piece of meat. So we tend to be machmir, and we tend to tell people that in order to avoid the machlokes, you should always send something that's ready to eat as is, and that doesn't need to be cooked or stuck in the toaster. Like, for example, can you send someone Pop-Tarts? That's an interesting shaila in halacha, according to the Maharil. You could eat a Pop-Tart without toasting it, but since normally people toast their Pop-Tarts, it could be that you're not Yotze according to the Maharil. You know?
Can't find kosher Pop-Tarts.
At one time there was tradition, the people who made the kosher soups, they made kosher Pop-Tarts as well. I don't know if they still do it, maybe they don't do it anymore.
Frozen waffles.
A frozen waffle, right? A frozen box of frozen waffles, right? Now, what's even more problematic is, according to the Maharil, he's even more machmir than Beis Shammai is on Yom Tov. Beis Shammai at least holds, fine, you can't send a live animal, but as long as it's in the portion amounts, you're allowed to send it, because that's called manos. And we even saw from Rashi in Beitza, that's what's called manos. How can the Mishnah Berurah say from the Maharil that it's not called manos just because it's not cooked yet? It doesn't make any sense. It's a stira. It's mamash a stira. Rashi says that manos means that it has to be ready to cook. And here the Mishnah Berurah from the Maharil says that manos means even more than that. It has to be ready to eat. So how do you understand what's going on over here? The Vilna Gaon paskins this way also. In Ma'aser Rav, it's brought down from the Gaon that Mishloach Manos Tarnagolis Mevusheles V'Dagim Mevushalim V'Chayotze Bozeh Davar Hamuchan Lechol Tekev. You have to be able to eat it right away. And the same thing is brought by the Aruch HaShulchan, who is so machmir that he says as follows: Upashit hu shetzarach lishloach davar haroi lachila v'lashatia miyad Kimotzliu mevushal avol im shalachai lo yatsa. The Aruch HaShulchan is the most stringent position. He doesn't even reckon with the Pri Chadash, and he says if you send a raw piece of meat for Mishloach Manos, you're bichlal not Yotze the mitzvah. At least according to the Mishnah Berurah, you're Yotze according to the Pri Chadash, according to one opinion. But according to the Aruch HaShulchan, you're not Yotze at all. And I noticed that Rabbi Yosef actually raises this question. Yes?
Is this Shalach Manos for Purim only or for other Yom Tovim?
It's only for, this is in Shulchan Aruch only for Hilchos Purim. But it's not, as we saw in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Yom Tov, we paskin like Beis Hillel that you can even send a live animal as your Mishloach Manot for Yom Tov. So Rabbi Vadya also points out, I mean, you can go through it yourself. He has a very interesting discussion where he's not machriya, he doesn't end up telling us, but he says he just brings down different shitas who raise this as a contradiction. How can it be that we're looking at the same word mana, and some interpret it as being raw, and some interpret it as being cooked and ready to eat? He even brings down from the Netziv, from the Sefer Hamek She'elah, he says that just because something is a mana, is a food item, it doesn't mean it. Manos doesn't mean that it has to be ready to eat, and he proves it from a pasuk in Shmos. It says, "V'lo kachta es hechazeh," you shall take the chest of the korban, v'heinafta oso tenufa, wave it, v'hayalecha lemana, and it shall be as a food portion for you. Right? Is that from Parshas Tetzaveh? I think it's from Tetzaveh, if I'm not mistaken. I think we just read it. But in any event, the point is, v'hu lakcho chai v'lo mevushal. When we talk about the waving of a piece of meat from the korban, we're talking about a piece of raw meat, and it's still called manna in the Torah. So how do we get to this whole point where the Mishloach Manos has evolved to the point from the Maharil that it even has to be completely ready to eat? So all I'm suggesting is that this was a way of upgrading the Mishloach Manos of Yom Tov when there's no longer an Isser Malacha on Purim. We find that this is the tendency of Chazal in general, that whenever something is relaxed in a holiday, a holy day observance, there's a tendency to be more machmir in some other area of that Yom Tov observance. And because, therefore, there's no longer an Isser Malacha on Purim, we then clamp down and are more machmir to accentuate the Yom Tov aspects of sharing food and gifts with our friends, and more narrowly define halachically the parameters of what Mishloach Manos and Matanos Levyonim are. Yes?
I also recently read that the minhag is developed of two different foods, but in fact the halacha is two foods. So if you're Pop-Tarts, you can send one package of 2 tarts. Is that correct?
So some poskim actually disagree with that. Some poskim say that if you send 2 of the same food, you're not yotzei, because what's the difference between sending 2 half slices of bread and 1 slice of bread, or 1 challah or 2 half challahs? So theoretically, since they're conjoinable into one food item, therefore it's a machlokas achronim. It's a machlokas in the achronim whether you can send 2 rolls of the same, like 2 challah rolls. Would you fulfill? That's why we tend to be machmir, again, to send 2 different food items. But it could be, again, for the same reason, as far as, again, very carefully, overly defining the parameters of this mitzvah.
Just further to that, and I had a question. I mean, it says something about having 2 separate brachas as well. Do they go as far as to say? Some
say that they should be 2 brachas, but again, that's a chumrah. It doesn't have to be. They can both be mazonos if you want them to be.
I'm just wondering, I mean, is it a greater simcha to receive something that you can eat immediately without having to go to the trouble of cooking it, even though it's not a Yom Tov?
Perhaps yes. Perhaps it has to do with the added level of simcha that Chazal wanted you to have to compensate for the lack of prohibition of Isser Malacha. So, with all of this in mind, yes, sure.
So, just trying to understand, I get the gist of it, but I'm just trying to go back to the words now. We started by saying that the pasuk had the extra words Matanos Levyonim, right? But then the whole discussion seemed to be around Mishloach Manos, and then at some point we went and somehow the terminology got vague, and then we went back and forth, and the shir is called Mishloach Manos, a Yom Tov mitzvah. But if we follow the pasuk, are we suggesting that it should really be Matanos Levyonim? Which one is the mitzvah here?
The reality is that the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos on Yom Tov there's no division between food to my friends and food to the aniyim. I have to provide for my family members and my friends, and I have to provide for the aniyim as well. The Medrash says that you should not keep your door locked, provide for those less fortunate. But it seems that when it comes to the Yom Tov example, there's no clear line of demarcation between as 2 separate mitzvahs, one of Mishloach Manos and the other of Matanos Levyonim. Chazal actually observe that when it comes to Matanos Levyonim on Purim, you don't have the same stringency of it having to be food. That's why when it comes to Matanos Levyonim, you can give them cash and still fulfill the mitzvah. But thematically, it's the same idea as the mitzvah of Mishloach Manos on Yom Tov. If anything, the only reason why you can't give a person cash on Yom Tov is because there's an Isser Malacha, and a person's really not supposed to be handling money on Yom Tov. So that could also be an extra feature of the fact that there's no Isser Malacha on Purim, is that we define the mitzvah of Matanos Levyonim differently from Mishloach Manos precisely because there's no Isser Malacha.
So the diuk of the Torah Tamima then is on, because it seems that it's on the words Matanos Levyonim.
Yeah, he makes it specifically on Matanos Levyonim. But I'm saying differently. I'm saying that no, that when you look at the whole idea of Manos from the Mishnah in Beitzah, you see it's originally mandated of Mishalch and Manos. It doesn't distinguish between your friend and the poor. It just says Mishalch and Manos, and as the Shibbolei Haleket comments on that theme in Maseches Beitzah and the Shalah, they say that it has to do with sharing with family members, sharing with friends, and sharing with the poor. It's all the same on Yom Tov. And on Purim, we delineate as 2 separate mitzvahs because there is no Isser Malacha, so you can fulfill it with cash as well. Am I explaining?
Yeah, I think it doesn't. Yes, but the difficulty that I'm looking at the way we started with. We said, look, Yom Tov was dropped, and there we put in, instead of Yom Tov, what did we put in? We put in Matanos Levionim.
Right.
And all the examples that we've given are that of Mishloach Manos.
Right.
All
So
the details of the foods and things like that.
Right,
But really,
right.
what we put in was Matanos Levionim to replace it.
Yeah. So all I'm
So
saying,
the
right.
diuk is, I'm stuck.
So the diuk that I'm making is don't get hung up on the fact that it's the only thing that's added is Matanos Levionim. The pasuk originally said Mishloach Manos. I mean, you could ask a kasha on the Torah Tamima. If it says in the pasuk, Simcha u'mishta v'Yom Tov, and inclusive in Yom Tov is sharing gifts with the poor, also inclusive in Yom Tov is sharing gifts with friends too. So the pasuk shouldn't have said Mishloach Manos either. You should have said nothing in the first pasuk, and then Mishloach Manos and Matanos
Because it
Levionim in the
appears in
second.
both.
Right.
It appears.
So the way I'm trying to explain it is that it's true that Mishloach Manos is written in the first pasuk, and that's trying to explain that part of the Yom Tov experience, as in every Yom Tov, is to share food with your friends and with the general public. But now that the Isser Malacha was removed, there has to be more explicitness in the detailing of what we still want to remain. And that's why Matanos Levionim was added. Not dafka because Matanos Levionim and not Mishloach Manos, but just to add extra verbiage to explain, to flesh it out more carefully, that you have to have every aspect of this more carefully delineated. And perhaps even you could say is that the reason why there's such a delineation in these two mitzvahs between Matanos Levionim and Mishloach Manos is gufa because we want to provide more texture and detail because of the fact that there's no Isser Malacha.